Welcome to today's webinar, SDL Tridion Sites 9 Technical Webinar, UDP and Content Mashups. My name is Christina and I will be your host today. Before the webinar, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this webinar. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session through the same link you are using right now. Also, recording will be shared shortly after the webinar. Second, please feel free to send questions in the Q&A box. We will be answering your question at the end of the session. If you don't get answered during the webinar, we will follow up afterwards. Now I will hand over to Ivo to begin the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Welcome to this webinar. It's about the unified delivery platform and the content mashups for SDL Tridion Sites 9. The agenda for today is about then the content mashups, and then after that the unified delivery platform. But first the intros. My name is Ivo van der Lagemaat. I work for SDL Tridion for about 17 years. The first 10 years was in development of Tridion, mainly at the content management level. After that I joined the media manager for about 6 years, and lately I become one of the product owners for Tridion Sites.
Thanks, Ivo. My name is Ben Middleton. I'm the technical product owner for the delivery platform, which was formerly Tridion Content Delivery. We've more recently been working with the Tridion Docs team. I've been working in content management for 22 years, predominantly on Java-based content management. I'll be sharing some details after Ivo has discussed around the content mashups feature that we're introducing.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Then about the content mashups. First, I want to actually explain something about this webinar about the content mashups. So we will focus mainly on the Tridion DX content mashup scenarios, and we're going to have a look at the Tridion Sites front-end application, how it actually can contain content from Tridion Docs, and that content can be either a link to Tridion Docs or really embed the content of Tridion Docs. So first, the scenario that is actually how to do a product launch without content mashup. So how can you do it today with Tridion Sites and Tridion Docs? So imagine we have a company, and then we want to have actually like a customer journey, and how do we do that with launching a new product? So for example, we have a new product that's actually creating a new bike, and that new bike needs to be launched globally and also to the local markets. And with that launch, you also need some kind of material or marketing content to be created, and it also has to be put online, and the same applies actually for the support content. So about the specifications of the bike and how to maintain it, and that kind of stuff needs also to be created and to become online. And then somehow we need those linked, those two contents together, so users can actually easily find it and consume it. So for the Tridion, for the technical writer that actually writes its support content, it uses his own document management system. So in this case, it's going to use Tridion Docs, and it focuses purely on the technical support documentation. And with the documentation, he creates his topics, his publications, and mainly the user own taxonomy for classifying their content. And this taxonomy is, because it's Tridion Docs, it's an external system. And then if you can actually write your marketing material, you need some glossy content, so a lot of photos, a lot of nice text should be there, and also can classify the content with their own taxonomy. In this taxonomy, if you're using Tridion Sites, it's actually internal in the system of sites. And somehow on the website we need to actually manually link to the PDF of the online product content. And if you have those kind of links to PDFs, that's actually created with the Tridion docs, it's pretty hard also to maintain this link. It can easily be not available anymore. There's no easy way to detect this. And then when it's all is complete, you can actually go to your online store, and in the online store you can actually focus on your local country themes. You can easily consume parts of the website and your documentation if somebody bought the bike, and actually link him to the right materials. And that is actually how it is done without the content mashups in Tridion Sites. So what I've been working on is actually doing a product scenario with the content mashup. So how can you easily consume content from docs into sites. So the scenario is basically the same. We still need to launch a new product. We still need to create the marketing content. We still need to create the support content. Both needs to be online, and we still need to link everything together. So the Tridion or the Tridion docs technical writers still using their own management system. The focus still on their technical support content, but they're using now somehow a shared taxonomy. It's not their own taxonomy, but a shared taxonomy. And that shared taxonomy is actually then curated and maintained in Tridion Sites. So also then the marketing people are actually still creating their own content, putting it live, and that content they actually classified with the same taxonomy. And if we are able to use the same taxonomy, we can actually combine the website and the documentation in one shared delivery platform. And with that platform, you can actually have one entry point where you can ask for the content from sites and docs from your web application. So your web application drives this content mashups. I give a concrete example later on this presentation how it's actually working. And then in the online store, it's still the same. You still have your local country details. They still probably use their own taxonomies, but indeed you can actually link to the normal website, which easily contains the documentation. And also, if you have the website, you can embed the content from docs. You can also see it then as a link, or you can really embed the content, and you have much more control of if the content of the support content is available, yes or no. So if you go now, and this is actually what I was mentioning about the online store, it still remains the same. So we created some kind of small example of a marketing phase. You still want to launch a new bike, and you put actually the bike on the page. And the web app actually can detect this bike that's actually put on a page and see what kind of keywords are used to classify the content of this bike. And then you can actually ask our delivery platform, give me actually also related content from the docs content that is actually also classified with one or more of those keywords. And if that is the case, then actually the web application can actually retrieve that content and then put it on the page as well. And now we showed actually inline the whole content, but you can also think about, hey, I want to create a link to actually the published content of Tridion docs. And you don't have to actually have one piece of content. Of course, you can have multiple pieces of content that you can actually put on your page. And this way, actually, the web application drives support documentation based on your marketing materials, your marketing content. So actually, to summarize it a bit, what we have right now is actually we have Tridion docs and we have Tridion Sites, and they're both using their own taxonomies. So it's really hard to find related content or classify it with the same keywords. So what we're going to do for Sites 9 is actually the Tridion Sites uses the Tridion docs uses the taxonomy from Tridion Sites. So this one-way communication. So docs is extended with a new metadata binding handler to pull the taxonomy from Tridion Sites. And that's actually step 1, and that is scoped for Sites 9. And after that, we don't have a target or a schedule for it yet. Then we can also have support for external taxonomies in Tridion Sites, because a lot of customers already have using Tridion Sites or Tridion docs with an external taxonomy. So this is mainly driven by the web application. So the people that are actually creating the website, the marketing website, don't see anything, don't have control of it, what is visible on it. It's mainly indeed driven by the web application. So what I'm now going to show is actually how can this work for an editor. We're still looking at it. We are having scenarios how it might work. We're not finalizing it yet, and we're also not sure if this is gonna be made available in Sites 9 yet. But we're working hard on it to make it possible, but it's not 100% sure yet. So, but I want to still show you how we think it can also be done from an editor point of view. So we have actually Experience Manager, and in Experience Manager you can actually modify your website how it's currently looking. So you just open your website, you get nice controls over it, and then you can actually modify the page. So you actually do the insert content on the page, and if you select that one, you can actually different all the content types. We created a new content type that's called docs content, and this one you can actually drag and drop in the right position of the page, and actually you control in the layout of the page where you can actually drop it. Once you actually drop it, it will actually create a new component. In a new component you can give the title, and you can actually save it in a particular folder, and that's for the moment all you need to do. Once you have done that, we actually create a placeholder, and a placeholder actually only is the rectangle where you actually put the content, but there's nothing done yet, there's nothing specified, it's just a empty content basically. If you find it, you can actually select it, and you can then say open in form view, and if you do open in form view, you basically get edit the component. This screen doesn't look really correct at the moment, but the idea is actually to find the correct keywords where you can actually classify what kind of content you want to retrieve from Tridion docs. So this is mainly done with keywords. So you can actually select keywords that is related to this particular bike. Like I said, so the whole list does make sense. We're still looking at how to make it better, but once you fill on these kind of fields, you actually place save and close. Then we actually make a call to the unified delivery platform. Then we ask for, hey, do you have this piece of content in Tridion docs with this kind of content classified with those keywords? When that's the case, you can actually get the content, and then it is shown on the page. And then it's also still up to the page, or maybe up to the control as well. Do you want to display it inline, embedded like this, or do you want to actually produce a link that people can link in, and you can really go to the documentation portal. And that was actually it for the content mashups on a high level. Now I want to give the control to Ben for the unified delivery platform.
Okay, thanks, Ivo. So I'll be discussing further around this story within the context of the unified delivery platform, but I also want to talk about what changes we've done in the platform to support this in both Tridion docs and Tridion Sites, specifically for existing Tridion Sites customers that may be familiar with our content delivery platform. I'll make reference to where we've change the platform to support docs. So first, high-level component overview of all the pieces that we have in our current delivery platform. This is the one that will be shipped with Sites 9. So first, a bit of history. So for the most recent Tridion Docs release, which is actually called Knowledge Center 13, we made changes to the unified delivery platform to support delivering docs content. Because prior to that, Tridion Docs was using its own XML-based delivery environment to deliver content. So it made sense to use the knowledge that we had within Tridion Sites and our own delivery platform and to share it with Tridion Docs. And then we can make use of all the infrastructure around that, so whether it's partners building on functionality or just the general knowledge we have and the extensions that we have within the platform, these all then become available to Docs customers. And also the other thing clearly it's driving here is the ability to support this mashup scenario. So in order to do that, we extended our deployer. So you can see on this diagram I've split the what we call the content interaction services, or CIS, between sort of editorial facing and web app facing services. So each one of these squares is one of our microservices, and each one of them is a standalone separate microservice. So on the left-hand side, you can see these editorial-facing ones. So our deployer was extended in order to support docs content. So Tridion Sites still sends its format of what we call the transport package, and within the deployer, we've enabled a new add-on mechanism that allows you to essentially plug in different modules to support the different content sources. So we obviously already had a Tridion Sites one, which was modified to support our new deployer as well. And then for Tridion Docs, we implemented a Docs add-on for that deployer. So that's how we work out how to ingest that data into our platform. And then we also introduced some additional services to support docs. So you'll see at the top here, there's a set of three: the index service, the query service, and Elasticsearch in the middle. These clearly weren't available in Tridion Sites prior to this, but this was a requirement that the Tridion Docs customers needed. So we introduced these services to support that, and these will now become the backbone of a lot of our features going forward, not just to support content mashups, but to support our personalization features. So they're all new services that came in with the introduction of the Tridion Docs UDP platform release. And then there should be some familiar services elsewhere on here that our Sites customers should be familiar with. There's obviously the preview and session services, which support our experience manager, which is what Ivo was just demonstrating on the previous slide, where it's essentially in-context editing of content on a live web app. Then there's the moderation community services, which support our user-generated content. So they've been extended to support Docs customers as well now. And then there's the discovery service, which you see at the bottom there, which is the one that enables capability lookup, and it also provides some authorization services. And I'll go into detail about some of these services and how they've been modified going forward. But the big new piece coming in the Tridion Sites 9 release is a new content API, this big yellow block that you'll see on the screen. And I'll go into some detail about the changes we're doing there. So this is just a summary again of those services. I don't think there's anything there that's unfamiliar for anyone from Tridion Sites. And if you're a Tridion Docs customer, then if you've looked at how we work with the Knowledge Center 13 release, some of these should also be familiar with you. One here on the bottom right that we mentioned, the ActiveMQ service, that's not put on our previous diagram, but we use that for enabling synchronization between server-side caches. Something else we introduced for our release to support Tridion Docs 13 was to containerize all our services. So we now, in our own cloud offering, we have containers for all those microservices, and you can see them all listed here. And we'll continue to do that in our Sites 9 cloud offering. We're also talking about providing those Docker files to contain those containers to our customers. So there's a licensing issue that prevents us from shipping the Docker files directly, but the Docker containers images directly, but we can share the Docker files so that these customers know how we've built them and can tailor them to their own needs if they wish to build their own private cloud or deploy them on their own cloud solution. So the brief summary on each of the services here. So as I mentioned before, the discovery service is responsible for the capability registration and lookup. You'll see at the top of this page there's a small section around how those services provide the ability to auto-register themselves. So it means that once they're registered, any client using that discovery service can always find out the location of that capability. It's also responsible for Topology Manager, which is a Tridion Sites specific feature that enables dynamic link resolution based upon different website environments. And as I mentioned earlier, the discovery service, we also include our OAuth2 token service in there. There's a small example there on how our clients interact with the token service. Then our context service. So this was a service that we developed. It was formerly known as SDL Mobile. So predominantly it provides what we call a context engine that exposes device-specific information for all manner of devices. There's hundreds of thousands, there's tens of thousands of devices in our database, and there's also some dynamic resolution features in there. But the nice thing about that is it enables you to do augment a responsive website design with some detailed device information that you might not be able to determine just from the dynamic resolution. And then related to that, we also provide a contextual image delivery service, and this does real-time image resizing and manipulation on any image that you choose to use within your web application. Again, this can be made use of for Docs customers as well if they wish to use it to support their responsive designs. And often customers will use the combination of the contextual image delivery service with the context service to drive the image parameters that you pass to this service based upon the result of the device resolution. So I mentioned the user-generated content services. So this has been extended for Docs customers now. So we had the two pieces of the service. The community service is the web app facing one where the web app users interact with that service and leave comments on topics, pages, components or whatever with sites content. And then we have the moderation service that we have a pair of moderation dashboards that interact with. So there's the moderation piece for Tridion Docs is actually coming in the Knowledge Center 13 Service Pack 1 release in a couple of months. So that will finally expose the moderation dashboards so you get access to those comments. And of course we've had that in Sites already. Then Experience Manager, I mentioned briefly how that's being used. So although Tridion Docs doesn't use Experience Manager directly per se, it does. The goal of the content mashup story is that Tridion Sites users can use Experience Manager and still be able to render Docs content with those related links or inserted topics within the web page. So they'd still be able to use the benefits of Experience Manager on Docs content, but from a Sites perspective. So the deploy service, this was actually newly built for the Knowledge Center 13 release. So we now have a new Open API-based deploy service which supports both the legacy Tridion Sites package format and the new Tridion Docs deployer format and endpoint. And to support that, we now have split the service into two. So we have an endpoint API, the deployer service that you see on the left here, and then we have a number of deploy worker services that you can deploy in order to work on the packages coming in from that deployer. So this enables you to scale out the deployer successfully, and it's how we do it in our cloud release. And to support that, we have some existing queue mechanisms that we already had, plus we now introduced support for Amazon's SQS queue. So that's essentially the queue of packages being sent to the deploy service. We have a new binary storage mechanism alongside the file system one that we can use that allows us to, again, to distribute the incoming packages, those zip files that we get sent from the clients, allow them to be distributed amongst multiple deploy workers. So that's why I have that distributed out. And then we have a new state storage mechanism in the middle here. So what this previously for Tridion Sites users, we had a state was essentially managed through an XML file, and we interacted with that file, and the client would read it and determine what state the deployment was at. What we've now done, we've pushed this and persisted this into the database so that we can query it properly, we can maintain audit histories of things, and again it allows those deploy workers to be scaled out and share the same state mechanisms so they know not to work on packages that have already been in progress or whatever. And then the broker DB doesn't really change at the end there. That's the end target for the incoming deployer packages. You'll see the supported database platforms here. You'll see an asterisk next to MySQL. The reason that is they're only currently supported in our cloud release. So our on-premise deployers are currently only supported on Oracle and SQL Server. So the search services, these are new, as I was mentioning earlier, in Knowledge Center 13 to support their requirements, and this is now being implemented as a pair of services. So we have an index services which is responsible for taking content from that deployer pipeline and breaking it up and assembling it as content that our Elasticsearch cluster can deal with. And then we have the web app facing query service, which the web app will query. It's another open API based service, and that then gives you back the results based on those queries. So the way it's been implemented is actually quite extensible. So there is an interim indexing format that we use. I think I've got a summary of some things here that allows you to well, allows us in the future, if Elasticsearch is no longer the indexing search service of choice, we can always choose to re-implement implementation on a different search engine without having to change any of the indexing or querying APIs. And as I mentioned earlier, this will become the backbone of our personalization features. So in Tridion Sites 9, although I've not explicitly mentioned it in this presentation, our new prescriptive personalization is based upon this Elasticsearch mechanism. There's just one small caveat for the search side, which you probably spotted down on the left here. We don't have the scope to introduce the index and query support for regular content and sites, Tridion Sites, in the 9.0 release, so that will be coming along shortly afterwards. But it will be there to support the XO functionality, the experience optimization functionality, which is our prescriptive personalization. And this is an example of the OpenAPI query that we have within that search query. So you can see you can build up criteria quite nice. It's a sort of a fluent API that allows you to add any metadata that we've indexed on content. So the examples here are all Tridion docs-based metadata, but it will be broadly similar when we implement this for the sites release as well. And then just to fill in the gaps of all the final pieces, we still have our content interaction library, which is our native Java and .NET client libraries that interact with our content interaction services. So these are always designed to have as few dependencies as possible, so there's no Spring framework or anything like that there for Java people. And it provides a lot of features that prevent mean that the customer building that web app don't have to do some of these things. So it provides OAuth 2 authentication, it provides the capability resolution against the discovery service, and it also provides distributed caching. That's true in both Java and .NET. There's an example there from our Java configuration. So the content mashups, in order to facilitate this within Sites 9 release, we've also been building in parallel a new content API. So there was a lot of demand from customers to have access to a public content API, because previously we had essentially an internal facing service-based API, but we never intended it to be exposed directly. It was always intended to be exposed through the content interaction library. So as part of this exercise, we've been building this new content API in parallel to support primarily the content map story, but secondly as a new content API as the kind of the new replacement for all future APIs into our system. So this specific view I'm showing you here is how what service will be wired up in the Sites 9 release. So our content service will be composed of, it will continue to maintain the existing internal APIs for backward compatibility reasons, but we're also going to be exposing a new API, which is, at first it's going to be a GraphQL based service, and then later on we'll also expose a new REST API, native REST API on top of this as well. And then the web app will continue to be able to use the content interaction libraries as they are and talk to our content services through the existing mechanisms. But we will also enable customers to have their native GraphQL clients or native REST clients, and they will be able to talk directly to that new content API endpoint. And that provides a lot of flexibility for customers, as I'll go into, particularly around the GraphQL piece. And you can see here we've introduced the search query service as part of this as well. So in the initial release, the query API will be exposed just through its own open API based REST interface, and in a subsequent release we will expose it as well through the GraphQL based service where it makes sense, of course. So as I mentioned before, it will be essentially a hybrid content service in this first release, which will have the legacy endpoints, but it will also have this new GraphQL-based one. There's a small example here of GraphQL on the right here. For those that aren't familiar with it, it was developed by Facebook originally, and it was designed to be to resolve some of the problems with traditional APIs, in particular the number of round trips that you need on a typical REST-based API, which is, broadly speaking, entity-based. So rather than having to perform a query for instance, get me this page and then get me all its children as a separate set of queries, you can combine all of these into a nice query. And there's a very expressive query language that you ask what you want, which is the example you can see on the left, and the response is exactly what you've got. And then the other nice benefit is that you don't have overfetching or underfetching. So rather than a REST API, which has got a pretty static data model that gets returned, you essentially say, I only want these fields, and it'll only give you those things back, and you don't end up with spurious data or excess data that you just disregard. And because it's a specification and it's obviously got the heritage in Facebook, there's a huge community around it. So there's a lot of nice tooling around, not just for the sort of the Java and .NET people, but if you want to build a React-based client web application that talks directly to the service, there's things available for that already, which includes all the things like caching capabilities and all those other things that you need in a service. So it's a very flexible specification for building APIs. So we've started building this in our new content API. It shows the architecture of how that's wired together. Essentially, there's a series of data fetchers and data loaders, which are responsible for combining the entities that you're asking for within those queries. Then GraphQL has a resolution mechanism that builds those queries based on a type system. And that type system is very flexible. So what we will introduce in a future release is we will expose the strongly typed models that we have within Tridion Sites and potentially Tridion Docs data as well, so that you'll be able to, if you define in Tridion Sites, for instance, a schema with a very specific set of fields, they will be exposed directly within that type system and be queryable individually in that GraphQL service. Whereas right now they will end up just being part of the page or the page content, either as a rendered page or as the raw data. And in the initial release will be DXA, our digital experience accelerator, will be responsible for unpicking those types. But the plan is that these will all be moved into GraphQL so that those types are available natively at the API level. As I mentioned earlier, we're also going to be introducing that REST module, which will expose some of our core endpoints as more sort of traditional REST endpoints, because REST still has a good purpose for a lot of uses, and it often suits writable services better than GraphQL, even though GraphQL can support a write interface. But GraphQL is really geared up for web-based delivery for web application developers. And then to underpin this new world using GraphQL, we've introduced a content model as well within our system that allows us to classify content with a nice hierarchy of features within that. And this is the initial plan will be to expose our component presentations, components, those kind of things, the familiar pieces that you have within Tridion Sites content, and then later on we will extend, as I was mentioning earlier, that our strongly typed model will allow customers to extend the service and essentially extending this data model for specific types of entities within here, which will then be exposed through the GraphQL interface. So just coming round trip then to the original goal of this API is to first and foremost support content mashups. This is really just showing the sort of the deeper integration at the UDP side of how those content from Tridion Sites and Tridion Docs will come together. So as Eva mentioned at the beginning, Tridion Docs will have this metadata binding provider which will expose the Tridion Sites taxonomy to Tridion Docs. Both systems will independently publish their content to the deployer, to their associated plugins. UDP will then store that information, the information about that taxonomy on both the Docs and Sites content within the broker database. We'll obviously be indexing that in Elasticsearch as well, and we'll include the site stuff when that's completed in Sites 9.1. And then our content API will expose new root queries that we call them in GraphQL that enable you to get access to those combined bits of data. So an example here on the top right shows you being able to build up a web page that might contain a link to a Docs topic, or it might contain the embedded Docs topic on a page. So our API will support both those facilities using a new API on the GraphQL side of things. So that was my coverage of the universal delivery stack. So I see we've got a few minutes left still, and we've got a number of questions lined up already. So I think the first one was, are the Docker containers available to the public or only on the SDL clouds? I think I mentioned earlier that we plan to ship the Docker files so customers can build them themselves, but we won't ship the Docker containers themselves due to some licensing issues around the version of Oracle Java that we use in our containers. The next up, we've got a question: is the client-facing CIS and web app-facing CIS two physical CA instances? So let me just go back to our architecture again, and then we can discuss that. So the client-facing CIS, each of these is an individual service. So CIS is basically a collection of services, content interaction services. So there are technically, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 11 or 12, depending on how you deploy these things, separate services here. But these ones, the reason we have them separated from the client and web app facing is typically due to firewall reasons. So the web app facing one may be sitting in a different subnet or whatever, and you want to protect interactions with the underlying storage mechanisms. And similarly for the client things, you may not want the client applications having access to the web side of things. So another question here: are Knowledge Center 13 and are Knowledge Center 13 and Web 8.5 sharing a single broker database and 7 microservices? So yes. So the plan for a content mashup setup would be typically if you're already a Knowledge Center 13 customer and you want to make use of a content mashups and you want to use Sites 9, it won't support Web 8.5. You have to move to a Sites 9 setup, and typically you would update, you would keep your docs content and then upgrade to a Sites 9 UDP platform, which would then allow you to publish both sites and docs content into a single broker repository instead of data. And yes, in terms of the microservices, they will be shared. So we will deploy a single, or you'll be able to deploy a single deployer with both add-ons installed. And we have flexibility in how we deploy those services. So it could be that you may want to, for performance reasons or whatever, split the deployers and have separate workers for sites content and separate workers for docs content. Particularly if you're predominantly a docs customer with maybe a small marketing site to support that might be one option you choose to do, or you can just combine them together and then the deploy will work on either package as it comes into its queue. And similarly for the delivery side of things, so the web app facing CIS services, they will be typically shared between both docs and sites, but again, there's no reason you can't have separate content services for docs and sites customers. So one example might be if you're a docs customer with a predominantly set of docs content being delivered through a docs-based dynamic delivery web app, you may wish to have a separate content service just for that content, and then maybe the sites one where you're only pulling in some docs content occasionally. You have a separate one just to support the site's marketing side, and then you could have different web apps talking to each of those services. So there's flexibility in how you do those deployments, but again, there's no reason you can't put them all together, assuming if you want to deliver a single web app that can do everything off your content service, or a pair of web apps just sharing the same content service. So the question here: are there plans to change the licensing support model for Docker containers for on-premises hosting cloud customers? So there was we had a discussion previously about whether we switch to using OpenJDK for our shipped Docker containers on Java, because that's the licensing issue we have. Oracle don't allow you to distribute Java without agreeing to a lot of their licensing things, so you can't just package it up a Docker container and ship it out. So that is something we're investigating, but we haven't agreed to that yet. But to be honest, the building of the Docker containers is such a straightforward process if you have the Docker file that if customers are looking to build their own cloud delivery environment, then having those Docker files is probably sufficient, because it's just a case of running the Docker create process on those files, and it will push out the images for them. Okay, let me go to the bottom of this list. We've got a few more. So if customer already has Tridion Docs deployed and want to use UDP to deliver technical document into websites besides UDP platform, does the customer need any other implementation work except the out-of-the-box functionality? So I guess this relates to what Tridion Docs 13 is providing. So currently that's based on UDP for essentially the replacement of external reach for those Docs customers that are familiar with that. So that already comes with a reference web application that talks to our UDP platform. So clearly that gives them access to the UDP on those sites, but the question here, let me just review it again, want to use UDP to deliver technical documents into websites besides the UDP platform. Okay, so this actually sounds like more of a question of can Docs content be deployed outside of UDP? Well, I suppose you can continue to use the existing publishing mechanism for PDFs as one way of getting content out. If they want to deliver raw HTML out of UDP but don't want to use the UDP platform, then that would be something that would need to be handled either at the Tridion Docs publishing side in some format. And that's something I can investigate with the Docs team about other options there. But clearly we've taken external reach out of the equation here. So if you want to publish Docs content on the web, we typically encouraging you to use the UDP platform. So we've got a question here. SDL Web has had a contextual expression markup that lets you can change a response and delivery-based ADF claims. This use case is work for campaign integration and optimization of devices. Will this still be available on Sites 9, and would it apply to Docs use cases? So the contextual expression was very, as it mentioned here, this was geared up originally to support our campaigns integration with Ulterion, but later the Digital Experience Accelerator was modified to support this contextual thing without having claims in place. I mean, underpinning all of this is in fact our context service, which has a rule-based, JSON-based language within there, so you can actually define claims with these rules, which can then give you contextual information based on various input parameters. So that's still all part of our platform. So whilst context expressions per se aren't supported for Docs, Tridion Docs customers, they can use the context engine and the context JSON expressions for delivering content and still be able to make use of some of that. So if they want to inject content into ADF, which is our ambient data framework, if they want to put those claims in there, our context service will run those rules on it and then expose appropriate claims as a result of those rules. So hopefully that answers that question. Another question here, so could client index other than non-Tridion content in the same Elasticsearch and use the same search instance to power a website search? So this is an interesting one. So we've recently been working with a customer to do precisely this, where they have their own Elasticsearch and they want to combine the results from their Elasticsearch with our own Elasticsearch queries. So what we did with this customer was essentially we exposed our Elasticsearch endpoint as a REST endpoint that Elasticsearch exposes that allows you to do what's called cross-cluster searches, which essentially means you can query a single Elasticsearch node and it will pull back results from not just that node but from an external node as well. And then the combined results you can then make use of and combine in whatever form you want in the web app. The only caveat I would put to that is our query service currently only understands results coming back from our own Elasticsearch index. So if you're combining results from multiple Elastic searches, it would be up to the web application developer to talk directly to the Elasticsearch index to do that combined result. We do have an extension point in our query service that we're looking to expose to support those kind of queries natively in the query service, but that won't be available in Sites 9. Another question here, Elasticsearch is supported to search the content of the website. So, as I think I mentioned, it's currently Elasticsearch is only indexing Tridion docs content in the Sites 9.0 release, simply because we didn't have scope to complete all the work. But in the next release, which will be shortly afterwards, we will have that indexing piece in place that allows you to index Tridion Sites context as well, and then have the pair of them come back in that Elasticsearch index through the query service. So that will hopefully replace customers needing to use things like SI4T and those kind of solutions. And another question here, is that UDP SDL content delivery library that it's supposed to work with .NET Core 2? So this will be the CIL in our content interaction library on the .NET side of things. So there are plans to make this support .NET Core indeed. So it should allow you to do many of those things. I think there's still some work to be done in that, and that will broadly be aligned with the DXA release that needs to occur in order to support the Content Mashups platform. So it might not come out directly on the Sites 9.0 release, but might come out very shortly afterwards to align with the next DXA release. And I think that's all the questions I can see answered here. So if you've got any more, we've still got a couple of minutes others.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes. So if you have any other questions, please leave the question in the Q&A box. Or if not, this brings me to the end of this webinar. Thank you, Ivo and Ben, for presenting today. Thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. If you have any other questions, please contact our speakers directly. Also, you will be soon receiving email with the recording webinar. We hope this is useful and informative to you. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.